For 64 years, an American cent was a slab of pure copper nearly the size of a $50, heavy in the hand, dark with oxidation, and by the 1850s, quietly falling apart as an idea. The coin that replaced it lasted only about 3 years. It was borrowed, not invented. It was so badly designed it broke the machines that struck it, and yet Americans lined up around the block to get their hands on it. This is the story of the Flying Eagle cent, the little coin that started the penny we know today. To understand why it appeared, you have to picture the coin it killed. From 1793 onward, the United States cent was a large cent, a big copper disc about the size of today's $50. People called them cartwheels. They were awkward to carry, they tarnished, and they were disliked in everyday commerce. Worse, from the government's point of view, the price of copper was climbing. Gold pouring out of the California gold rush had thrown prices into turmoil, and copper rose right along with everything else. By the mid-1850s, it was actually costing the mint close to a full cent, sometimes more, just to make a single cent. The large copper coin had become a money loser. The director of the mint, James Ross Snowden, knew a change was mandatory. He wanted a smaller cent, made of a tougher, cheaper alloy, one that would let the mint turn a profit on its own pennies again. The answer was a coin only about 3/4 of an inch across, struck not in pure copper, but in a blend of 88% copper and 12% nickel. That nickel did something striking. It lightened the color of the metal. Instead of the dark chocolate brown of the old coppers, these new cents came out pale, almost silvery. Americans nicknamed them white cents, and sometimes just nicks, after the nickel inside them. Now the design, and here's one of the coin's little secrets. The man who created it was James Barton Longacre, the mint's chief engraver. But Longacre didn't really invent the Flying Eagle. He borrowed it. The soaring eagle on the front was adapted almost directly from the work of his predecessor, Christian Gobrecht, who had put a flying eagle on silver dollar patterns back in the 1830s. And the wreath on the reverse, that beautiful bundle of corn, wheat, cotton, and tobacco Longacre had already used himself on gold dollar and $3 coins from 1854. One numismatic house bluntly calls the whole coin a copycat, because almost nothing on it was original. It was a greatest hits assembly of earlier American art, and it worked beautifully. There's real meaning hidden in that reverse wreath, though. Corn and wheat from the farms of the North, cotton and tobacco from the fields of the South. On a coin struck in the late 1850s, with the country just a few years from tearing itself apart in Civil War, that little agricultural wreath quietly bundled North and South together, the whole nation's harvest wrapped around the words 1 cent. Before any of this could become law, the mint had to sell the idea to Congress and to the public. So in 1856, they did something clever. They struck a run of Flying Eagle cents dated 1856 and handed them out to congressmen, to Treasury officials, even to President Franklin Pierce, and to influential citizens whose opinions mattered. Technically, these 1856 coins were patterns, samples, struck before the law authorizing them even existed. They were never released for everyday spending. Only a couple thousand or so were made. And that is exactly why today the 1856 Flying Eagle cent is one of the most famous and coveted rarities in all of American coin collecting, a coin that was, strictly speaking, never even supposed to be money. Collectors began hoarding them almost immediately. The lobbying worked. In February of 1857, Congress passed the Coinage Act that formally authorized the new small cent, and in the same stroke, abolished the old large cent and the half cent entirely. The law also set up a system where Americans could bring in their worn-out large coppers and the battered Spanish colonial silver coins that had circulated in the country for decades and trade them straight across for shiny new Flying Eagle cents. The public response was something the mint did not fully expect. When distribution began in May of 1857, long lines formed outside the Philadelphia Mint. People stood and waited for the chance to swap their heavy, dingy old coins for the bright new white cents. It was, in its own small way, a sensation. One writer later called it a numismatic revolution. For the first time, an American coin was genuinely wildly popular the moment it appeared. But the Flying Eagle carried a fatal flaw baked into its own beauty. Longacre's design sat too high on the coin, and the trouble was where the high points landed. The eagle's head and tail on the front were positioned almost exactly opposite the heaviest details of the wreath on the back. When the press struck the coin, the metal couldn't flow to fill both sides fully at once. The result was that huge numbers of Flying Eagle cents came out weakly struck, soft in exactly the spots meant to show the most detail. To this day, even high-grade survivors often show a mushy eagle's head, and a truly sharp, fully struck example commands a serious premium precisely because they're so hard to find. The Mint fought this problem and lost. By late 1858, the coin was simply considered unsatisfactory to produce, and so after only 2 years of regular circulation, Longacre went back to the drawing board and lowered the relief, replacing the soaring eagle with a portrait of Liberty in a feathered headdress. In 1859, the Flying Eagle gave way to the Indian head cent, a coin that would run for half a century. The Flying Eagle's entire circulating life was over almost as soon as it began. The afterlife is a story too. When the Civil War broke out, people hoarded the little cents along with anything else that felt like hard money, and they vanished from circulation. After the war, they trickled back, only to be deliberately pulled out again. In Treasury redemption programs through the 1860s and 70s, roughly 13 million of the copper-nickel cents were rounded up and swapped for the newer bronze coins. By the 1880s, seeing a Flying Eagle in your change had become a genuine rarity. And that's the paradox of this coin. It was borrowed from older art. It was so flawed it was killed off in barely 3 years. But it did something no coin before it had done. It shrank the American cent to the size we still carry today. It introduced the copper-nickel alloy, and it proved a small coin could capture the public's heart. Every Lincoln cent in every pocket in America traces its shape and spirit back to this short-lived little eagle. That is the Flying Eagle cent, a beautiful, borrowed, broken masterpiece, and the true beginning of the modern penny.